Hi, Michael. Welcome back. The last time you were at the episode 55, and we talk about Olingo and OData, right?
Yeah, right. I checked it also. It's 1 year ago, more or less. So I guess
Wait a
1 year
sec.
and 1 month ago. Yeah,
Indeed.
sometime in
Yeah,
September.
end
Yeah,
of September. Incredible.
yeah,
And I thought it's a few months ago, but 1 year. Time flies.
yeah, exactly. Especially in this time. So yeah. And also for me, I guess when we talked the last time, just let me think. The project I'm currently working on has not yet really started 1 year ago.
Hmm.
And this also a bit, as mentioned, which currently drives me and interests me, how companies or development teams handle open source.
Hmm.
So I can explain a bit what we are currently doing. In the team we just started 1 year ago to invest and evaluate the service where we get better ratings for open source components. So especially with the focus on security and how we can handle open source usage within the development teams better so that each team has less effort on their side, so that we as a central team with a central service can support them to use open source in a safe way and ideally also with less effort.
Okay. What I did,
And
I check out the GitHub project. It's
ah,
called
mhm,
Rating for Open Source Project, sponsored
yeah,
by SAP. And
yeah.
this is the project you're involved in, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is the core part of our project,
Hmm.
which we use to calculate the ratings. So currently we focus on the security part, the security ratings. And internally, we have also a service, which is not completely decided when or how it will go open source. So the core library, which can really be used by everybody. And we are really eager also that somebody or more people start using it and give us feedback. And for these ratings or with this library, we calculate the ratings for open source projects. And internally with the service, we provide exactly these ratings to our colleagues. This is what we're currently doing. And also in meetings within our company, it's more often that I get asked, or we as team get asked, open source security rating, you mean if the open source component has security vulnerabilities? And we
Hmm.
always have to explain, no, that's not only about vulnerabilities, because there exists, I would say, a lot, security scanners or test tools, which check if a given open source library with a given version has known vulnerabilities. So because at the end you have just to check, as example, the NVD or some other uh, vulnerability database which manage such
Okay,
data.
which
And you have
databases are you usually checking for security vulnerabilities? Which databases are
currently the main which you check is NVD,
NVD? Hmm.
but for the security or for the known vulnerabilities, we have also other tools. And this was a bit the background of our service because the other tools were already used,
Hmm.
but we found often, perhaps not often, but sometimes that there are open source components, which there were no known vulnerability for such component, but the component was, as example, deprecated or out of maintenance, or that the community dissolved, but it was still used. But also, in addition, that there were vulnerabilities, but they were never reported to the NVD.
Hmm.
So this means when you search just in the internet for vulnerability for a library, you sometimes find something,
Hmm.
but there's no entry in the NVD.
Hmm.
So over the last year, we found, I guess, nearly 10 samples where we then requested an NVD, the related entry, the CVE entry. But also this was something where we said this should be improved. And what we do with our security rating currently is that we not only consider the known vulnerabilities,
Hmm.
we also check a bit how the projects handle security. And in the best way that the data where we use to calculate under rating, um, that we can get this data nearly completely automatically.
Okay.
Um,
So what I did, I
just
checked. I was really interested what you are doing, and the score part is interesting.
mm,
And you can even tweak it, so tune it to your needs.
yeah,
And this is 4 stars rating
yeah,
core. So just a Maven dependency, and then hooks to a
mm,
project and creates the score. So your
yeah,
project is a mix of security, as you said, and a little bit
mm-hmm,
also maintainability
yeah,
issue.
yeah,
What I found a metric which was really interesting for me was number of commits or something like that, right? This was
yeah,
the
exactly.
what the focus is a bit different in my project. You ask me now what happens in my world. So what I'm doing, I would say all the time. I wanted to say 80%, but I can remember what I did with a different project. So we usually
Mm,
use Jakarta or Micro profile.
mm-hmm,
And this solves a lot of problem already.
Yeah.
Because if you focus just on that, we have a simple rule or solution. Whatever you are adding, you have to justify, in an Excel sheet, and justify by saying what is the added value, business domain added value for the project. No added value, no dependencies. And with that, you can eliminate already 90% of nice to have, dependencies like SL4J. Recently, I deleted a huge, SL4J and logging almost framework from a project because it was a cloud native Kubernetes application. And in this particular case, you don't need any framework at all. In the same project, they use exception and error handling, not library almost, which is entirely not needed because it was a REST resource, so you can very easily map it to HTTP status codes. So, so therefore, for me, it is really easy because I say, okay, it is very unlikely that you will need something beyond microprofile and Java SE. And if you really need, then it is obvious. Then we have to use it, right? Let's say there would be one machine learning library, which is, or let's say, bouncy castle. We need a specific encryption. So then, regardless whether it is secure or not, we will have to use it, or we stop the project. So then it's not. We would properly measure, how dangerous the library is, but we have no chance. We have to accept that it is needed. And what could happen if such a library is problematic? For instance, it could also happen that it's unstable. So this library is needed, but it could crash frequently, or at least once a day. Then we properly isolate the library in a microservice. We say, okay, then it is, dangerous in a microservice. The other thing, which is really interesting me from your project, is the maintainability issue. So this is the big deal. What happens is I'm working as consultant, architect, and so forth, and I'm asked by large and small companies for advice. And this ranges from, how to start a project or how to fix a project, let's say. And what is still in Java very fashionable to add best of breed libraries. Whatever the developer they just add it. And security is more, I would say, political thing, right? Because managers don't like to have the next Equifax, and they try to at least introduce scanner tools, and they say, okay, if it breaks, we at least try. So this is like cover my ass strategy, right? But the real issue is forgotten dependencies. So this is more common than you think. Java is an old language, 25 years, and I spend my time from the beginning with Java, and I frequently see, clients who used, a library, and they forgot about that, and the sources just disappeared. And in the last 5 years, it happens more and more. So, the first time it happened to me, it was about 10 years ago, and back then, Apache SOAP 1 disappeared. So it was no more available from the Apache side, and we found exactly there an concurrency issue. So we had to decompile, create the sources, fix it, and recompile it. And right now, the most common question in my project is, what is my opinion about Lombok? I say, look, Lombok, right? This is not even a dependency. This is a code generator, actually. So the dependency is orders of magnitude more problematic. If you would like to talk about that, if not, just use Lombok and don't ask me about my opinion, right? So because if you take a look at GitHub, there are actually two guys in a organization called Art Switzerland or something like this. And what interests me, these two guys speak frequently at conferences, together. What happens if they disappear or lose their interest or whatever? What we will do, right? And Java developers feel offended. So then I say, okay, if I see, okay, this is a little bit problematic to talk about Lombok, then I take another example, Vue.js. And the Vue.js is very popular JavaScript framework. If you take a look, wait a second, we can do it right now because Vue.js GitHub. And this is a really nice library, actually. Also optional. You can still, but so if you take a look at the Vue.js, there are 4,700 stars and 3,000 forks and 740 contributors, 731 contributors. So if you take a look at the contributor list, you will find that the main contributor is a guy Ivan Yu, and then Chris Fritz is the next one. For I think even what I tell you right now is just the page. Wait a second, it's not even the framework. So if you go to the framework, now we are talking. The framework are 175,000 stars and 27k forks, and the contributors are 380 contributors. And if you take a look at the contributor lists, the first guy, the only guy who commits is the Ivan Yao with 203,000 commits. And the second most popular committer in this project is a person or not called ViewBot with 77 commits. And then all the others, the next one, 47 commits. It means the entire project, 203,000 commits were created by Ivan Yao, and the contribution stopped actually last year. So, and now if I show management, project lead or whoever this link, the project immediately dies. We don't even have to talk about, security or vulnerability. So before we start a project, my question is, how long should it last? Do we build it, for this year or 5 years or 10 years? And what is the team, Are the developers would like to maintain other libraries? Are they just happy, to deliver the software? It's really dependent on the context. And meanwhile, I would say, with developers or teams I'm working with, the developers and teams, they really like boring software. They don't like, to learn every other day, a new library or framework. They're just happy if it works. And this is why security is more like, management focus. And my focus is, okay, if we use something, how many contributors it really have? Then if it breaks, can we fix it? We in our team? If not, how many other developers understand the technology? This is the risk management from my perspective. And some people say, okay, I'm exaggerating, because no, I mean, this is one of my jobs, firefighting. This is what I'm doing, and I see it all over the place. If you are not interested in it, different story. We don't have to talk about it. But if you ask me my opinion, this is my opinion. So what I will do in your force rating tool, not only how many commits, but the how to call it, distribution among committers.
Yeah.
How the commits are spread among committers. And I would say a serious project, serious dependencies, I would expect at least 3 committers who contribute frequently. I can tell also my story, right? I created a JavaFX library called Afterburner, and I still like it, but I created it with JDK 8, and now I spend more time on the backend. So for me, it takes a lot of time, to think into JavaFX again, because now I'm not in a JavaFX project, and I get lots of questions about the library, whether I could do something about that, but I have really no time. And I'm actually the only maintainer. So, the Afterburner is somehow popular. So I get over and over questions about that. So if you think about this, is actually high risk for the project who's using my library, because not even I know where I will find, the time to contribute back. And this is what I'm talking about. So if your tool, if it would run, against my Afterburner FX library, should say, okay, major problem. The last commit was probably 2 years ago. Adam is the only committer. No one and he's not willing to accept pull requests, which I also don't, because it was a minimalistic library. I don't like to add more features. This was the idea back then, right? So this is what I would do. Just a distribution of commits across committers in a certain amount of time, like a rolling window. And you can actually move the window, would be cool. You could say, okay, the major contribution happened, 2 years ago by these 3 contributors. What would be also nice, whether these contributors belong to the same organization. Because if all the contributors belong to the same organization, it could mean, the company would like to have a marketing gig or whatever, and they, contributed like crazy, then the budget was over and the project will die.
Yeah, this remembers me a bit regarding the Apache projects that they also target when you are going in the, not staging, in the incubation, that you have 3 committers or contributors from 3 different companies or organizations. Because also they want to have this diversity, not that say, oh, there's one company which drives the topic, and as soon the company is not interested anymore, the project dies.
Yeah.
Also to have this, and that's really, so some ideas you had, or you just said, we already had also in the past. Also for the contributors and commits, we normally check this the last 3 months, but I like also the idea to see how it was, as example, 1 year ago, and also perhaps to see if the people which started in the project are still active in the project, or if perhaps other people take over and so, because you mentioned that bit security remembers me. I don't have the name of this JavaScript library, but there was also, I guess it was last year or so, where JavaScript library was only also just by one maintainer, and then the maintainer was not interested anymore and give it to another guy.
Mhm.
And this other guy then already, I guess, with the next commit, introduced some backdoor.
Mhm.
And nobody heard about this. And so a lot of companies used this library before they realized that there's a problem with the library. And then they had to check which version they are using to have the version without a background. There was a bit of trouble around this. And there's also why I guess it's really important to see that not only one person really drives the project, at least from maintainability. But also, this is what I try to say is, as mentioned, we have more the security focus, but also we consider the other parts. But when you have a library which is only really done by one person, which is the main contributor, it's far more likely that this person can do something harmful with the project without that somebody knows it early enough.
Also interesting because I talked about recently on a conference. This was March last year, and there is a a library called Core.js. Maybe this is what they're referring to. And the Core.js is used by lots of JavaScript frameworks, and I found it because I did an audit for a client, code review for front end, and I found a please donate. It's like, why donate? And this was like, please donate. I don't know, support this library. And I take the research, and this was by accident. I found articles that the Core.js library is used by major frameworks like React and Angular and stuff like that. And it was maintained by one guy. And this guy he wanted support, but didn't accept the support, something like this. There's actually, I will put the link to the show notes. The register wrote an article about that. And then he killed on a motorbike someone, and now he's in jail.
Oh.
And now there is no way to pass the how it called commit rights from the library to other person. So, and GitHub thinks about what to do in such a case. But the problem only arises because companies use this library just because it was cool without thinking how many contributors it had. And we had it in Java all the time. So this is why we got, the JDBC, not to be depending on on one vendor. The vendor independence was, we spoke in Java about 25 years about that. And then it was out of fashion because we said, it was like slow moving and bloated and ivory tower, all the APIs. So let's go ahead with best of breed. And now we have the best of breed, Every guy can on weekend or gal or guy can create a library and then forget about that. And this is, by the way, I created a library. It was a library I needed for my project. I just open sourced that. It was called Anhydrator. It's still a thing. And what it does is very simple. It can convert one format to another with Java 8 functions, basically. So very simple. And I published it on Friday, and I got an email on Monday. This is really great. We use it in a hospital. And I say, hey, look, this is actually was not meant, as high. It was just a joy project of me. It's just, and this is what I would never do that, right? So maybe I should put on my open source project like a header, don't use it or something like that, right? Because this is what I'm talking about. And another thing about risk estimation and security. So I don't know whether you know Quarkus.
Yeah.
And the Quarkus comes. We had a discussion last week. Comes with about 300 extensions or more. Because it's very popular. Now it's very fashionable, to create Quarkus extensions. And I say, fine, but if you think about that, so the Quarkus extensions are created by independent developers. How long do you think the extensions will survive? So do you really believe that all the extensions are going to be maintained, the next 5 years? Probably not. So the question is, which extensions are not that risky? And I would argue extensions which implement an API. And this is, for instance, microprofile. So, and we did the showcase. If you take a look on microprofile, the small UI, lots of extensions. I mean, even if the extensions disappear, we could move very easily from Quarkus to Helidon, for instance, right? So I would say in the security estimation, it's also interesting whether what you are using implements a API, which is implemented by other providers. This is the risk mitigation, right? So this was so whatever I did, back then at conferences, always my thing was, we have Jakarta, Java, microprofile, whatever, and we can pick and choose the vendors. And this really paid off in lots of projects because we can freely switch between the servers. I remember, back then there were JBoss 5, I think, was not that great. So we moved some projects to Payara or Glassfish. worked perfectly. So and this is harder, I would say, because what you will have to do is in Java, for instance, see whether in your dependency there's a reference to known API. This would be a set of microprofile. This would be a Jakarta, of course, JDBC. This comes already with Java. And what's of course hard is whether the APIs are actually exposed to the user, but at least whether they are references at all. Because if an external library just exposes their own interfaces, this is always problematic. Because even if you find security problem inside the library, you cannot just fix by replacing the library. So you are completely depending on the library, right?
Yeah, it is exactly. So one of the reasons why I several years ago preferred JE or now Jakarta E over Spring Boot or Spring frameworks. Because there you have the standardized APIs and okay, this is my, I don't know, reference implementation or this other implementation. And when I have problems with one, it's far easier to switch to another one. And this is what we currently have a bit sometimes, not a problem, but it's getting harder. We have also a lot of Spring Boot based applications. And then also when we do our security or our foster security rating checks. And then Jackson was such a familiar library, Jackson data bind, which is very often mentioned regarding security problems. And then also we said, the rating is not that good because they have often the security problems. And it would be better to use an alternative. But then the developer came to us and said, it's not possible. We cannot change this checksum because it's that deeply in or that deeply used by several other libraries within the Spring Boot environment, and you cannot just change it. And so this was also more or less a learning for us. That's really hard if you say, better don't use this library, use an alternative, because you cannot just switch.
Yeah.
You have always to change your own coding when you are not have a standardized API. And especially with this transitive and indirect dependencies, which is getting more complex because you say, it's on the third level of a library, which is a bad rating. You can just not change it because it's used by other dependency you have. But for us, the idea was also with our rating and that we provide this SAP internal to have at least that the colleagues have the awareness. Because sometimes, especially what I learned so I'm not that JavaScript guy, but I learned a bit that especially in JavaScript, somebody uses a direct dependency, which brings immediately 10 or 20 other dependencies.
Mm-hmm. For instance, really recently, what I did at a conference actually, so I created from scratch a JavaScript application without a framework. And what you can, and this is actually now the recent trend, I would say, with web components. And then just I pulled, SAP UI5 web component and a Vardin web component. And this was JCon conference. I think if they publish, I will send you the link. And they were on one page. So, and with that, what I showed actually is that if, let's say, SAP UI5 component breaks or Vardin breaks, this was date picker, we can pick another component. I'm not dependent on an infrastructural framework. I can just pick and choose whatever I like or whatever, is maintained these days. And in JavaScript, so just quickly, so I use lit, also minimalistic. Lit HTML is a small library. And what I really do is I do npm install and take a look, how, and then transpile it to ESM module and would like to see how large the file is. And this lit HTML is 1,400 lines of code roughly. With JavaScript doc, the JS doc. Then we pick sometimes Redux in more complex applications. And this basically it. So, and I say, look, if this breaks, I think we will manage to maintain this by ourselves. So we Java developers are able to understand 1,400 lines of JavaScript code to fix no minor changes and even maintain it. And it is well received. Regarding Jackson, in my micro profile in Java E world, you have the same problem. So Quarkus getting extremely popular, and Quarkus comes with both. It's developer choice to pick Jackson or JSONB. And sometimes for no reason, just pick Jackson. And I say, okay, this is for me a defect because now we are depending directly on the implementation. But if you will pick JSONB, then we can talk, right? Because if this doesn't work, we can adjust we can fix the extension by provide different implementation. And in my code reviews in traditional Jakarta applications, this is also basic rule on, for instance, it was very popular, I don't know why, on Payara projects, just to use direct Jersey dependencies. instead of using the JAX-RS, they developers knew there's a cool class and they use this OR Glassfish jersey. The problem you get there is, if we upgrade the runtime, it can break. Because what Payara could do, they can switch to another provider or newer version of Jersey, and your code won't run anymore. So what I did is I just search for imports with org Jersey or whatever I knew, and if I found them, this was a no-go, right? So very similar experience to yours from projects or at the same JPA. So in JPA project, for me, is no-go when the projects have direct dependencies to Hibernate or Eclipse Link, because then it's pointless. We are depending now on API and the implementation, and the trade-off would be, then go straight Hibernate, forget about JPA, or if you're using JPA, Hibernate is completely hidden. And I only have a recent experience with Spring Boot. I already talked about this several times. And this was an interesting part because the clients asked me for a code review and they thought this is Java E project, but it was Spring Boot. And I already signed the contract. So, okay, then I will do it. And the code was clean and looked nice. As I was actually happy. And the developers in the project told me they have to migrate anyway. I said, okay, why? And it turned out they used Spring Boot 1.4, I think 1.4.2 or something. And they found security vulnerability somewhere. And this was like, it was known vulnerability. So if you go to the Spring Boot page, it was listed. So it's not like we scanned, it was known. And management didn't like that. So, and they say, in order to migrate to the, to get rid of the problem, they have to migrate, I think, to Spring Boot 2. And this was not directly possible. So they had to migrate from 1.4 to 5, and then from 5 to 2. I said, okay, what's the problem? The migrate's like, yeah, the problem is there is no API. So because from 1.4 to 2, all the frameworks also changed. So this affects actually their code. And I never saw this in this way because it was never a problem in my world. As long as you're working, we never had a problem with server upgrades. It just happened behind the scenes, And if it didn't work, then we went to the team and said, hey, look, it didn't work because now you have one Jersey dependency or whatever, right? And this was early days. I remember WebLogic projects at the beginning. There was one project who used a proprietary WebLogic functionality, which disappeared in the next version. And the application stopped working. And we asked, BA back then. This was not Oracle, before Oracle. So what's the deal? It's like, hey, look, this was our, private implementation. And you use that, and now it's gone, and we can do nothing about that. So okay, now we only will use API. So this is
just reminds me. It was just 1 month ago where I get a mail or a question regarding Olingo again, because also for Olingo we decided we have a clear API project and the API jar where we said for this jar, for this API, we promise it will be always backward compatible, and then we have the implementation. And we say, don't use anything from the implementation library. And then the colleagues did exactly this. They used parts of the implementation. I don't know why. And then we found some more or less not bugs, but there were some constants which were public, which was not required. We changed it to private. And then the colleagues complained to us, oh, their build is breaking. And I said, wow, how can this possibly be? We have not changed something in the API. And they said, I see here this constant is now private and not public anymore. We said, you should not use this. It's not intended to be used. And we had a really big note at the beginning. So please don't use anything from the implementation package or implementation library, because this may be at any time changed, because this is our implementation. We only promise the API. And it's really, at least for me, a good approach if you try to, or if you provide a library which should be as long as possible stable and maintainable.
Also, the security. So, as you probably know, do you have experience with Quarkus?
Not much. I just had a small playground project.
Okay, that you know how it operates. Exactly. Yeah. So, Quarkus comes with lots of updates. So, I think once a month almost we get a new minor version. Not a big deal. Usually, it downloads all the dependencies. It still works. So, it was so far for me. There were no breaking changes. One time the POM XML changed, but the API remained stable. But Quarkus works with microprofile, and the microprofile has also 4 releases a year. So the API actually has breaking changes, and we have discussion about that. This is also interesting for you probably. And if you take a look at microprofile, is the microprofile, everyone likes microprofile, but the dirty fact is that I would say probably 80% of microprofile is actually Jakarta E. If you would take a look at the functionality, because CDI is huge, JAX-RS is huge, JSON-B and JSON-P are huge. So this is the major functionality. And the APIs with added value, the really nice APIs are smaller, right? And they tend to change. So it means if there is a new release of microprofile, I don't remember whether anytime the CDI was changed. No, it cannot be, because it's from Jakarta E. So the dependency injection model is always the same. The JSON-P, JSON-B is always the same. So this base stuff is always the same. And what they change is, for instance, metrics. They have to change the metrics because the Cloud Native Foundation also changed the spec, and now it can happen again because they think about merging the metrics. So, but if you take a look at the code, the metrics are optional functionality, which right now is delivered with annotations. And what happened is, the attributes inside the annotation changed, for instance. Or health checks. At the beginning, they are just health, and now they have liveness and readiness health checks. But now to evaluate how risky this is, what interests me, how many health checks an average project really has. I would say usually one, which is not a good thing. And if they are good, they are probably 10. It means if health checks introduces backward incompatible changes, I will have to change 2 annotations in 10 places, right? So if metrics changes, how many metrics such a project has, in average, the metrics are really bad. So what the developers are doing, just putting, one metered annotation on the class, and they are happy, and they think they are cloud native now. So this is easy to fix. If you have more evolved metrics like, gauges and counters, but I think I took a look on my project, a project I saw, you have at most, I would say 20 to 50. I never saw 50, but I can imagine there will be 50, custom counters, business counters per microservice. So then I will have to search and replace the counters. What I'm talking about is this risk is low because the APIs are added values or open API. Usually you have no annotations at all, so you get the Swagger endpoint. And if you would like to customize that, then you add the annotations. The same is true for fault tolerance. Usually fault tolerance completely optional. If you would like to have retries, so you put the retry. So it means I don't care. Even if microprofile would introduce breaking changes, it would be not a big deal. We could fix that easily. But if Jakarta introduced breaking changes, something different. I would say, imagine, semantic of JPA would change, transactions, whatever. Yeah. So, this is a big deal. Or CDI, we say, add injects now works differently, This is a big deal. But this should be also taken into account how a library is used. And I would say, the library with the most added value is open tracing. But if you look at the library, it actually is one annotation, traced. If you put traced, it will report to Jaeger all the services, and you get, the span. So the added value is huge, but, the surface area is small. So for me, it's interesting, the surface area. Library is fine, but if you use the library, how depending are you actually on the thing?
To be honest, I like, regarding versions and breaking changes, this approach with the semantic versioning.
Yeah.
To really make clear, okay, when we have some breaking change, we increase the major version, even if it's then after, I don't know, 1 or 2 years when I have a lot of breaking changes, I end up at version 7 already. But at least I like it because it's then clear, oh, there's a major version change. I can expect that a breaking change, which may hit me. Because what we also in our team provide, guidance and support for colleagues when there's a library which has a known vulnerability, and then they have to upgrade. And sometimes it's really just, I don't know, you use version 2.1.4 and the fix is in 2.1.5. So you can really expect just upgrade. Normally nothing happens, everything works out. But other libraries handle the versioning differently and don't rely on, when we just change the micro version, we make sure that there's no breaking so that everything is backward compatible. And then we get sometimes in trouble because we have then to find out that there's a change in. And also we had libraries when we checked it, just example, you have version 6.01. Is that a vulnerability? It's fixed in 13.1. And so, okay, from 6 to 13, so we expect really major changes. Then we had a look into release notes and the changelog of the library, but they just increased every time the version, so the major version, even if there are no breaking changes. And though we checked it and tested it and say, okay, we can say the colleagues it's safe to upgrade also from 6 to 13, it's not a problem. And sometimes I really wish that the project maintainers would really use it in the right way, the semantic versioning.
Yeah.
But also regarding security, because when we talked about how open source is used and how it is maintained over the time, because what we are also discussing by us internally, not only what we have to or what we can do before open source is used. So just at the beginning, you said, oh, in your projects, you mostly have some sheet where you check, oh, what's the benefit, what's the added value of the library, then there is the decision. For us, it's also the internal guideline for each development team. Before a library is added, it should be checked if it's more or less safe or it's okay to use it.
Mm-hmm.
We are very liberal, or get the developers a lot of freedom. What it means, it is safe to use, or it can be used, but at least it should not be, oh, I found this in a blog and I copy pasted it in my code.
But this always happens. Blog in Java.
Exactly.
I mean, this blog in JavaMagazin driven development in Germany or in Europe. This is what happens, and you can do whatever. And no kidding, I had discussions from why you use the library, because it was in JavaMagazin. Yeah, we have to talk with Sebastian Mayer and say, hey, stop writing, about dependencies.
That is exactly what we also see, that developers just use it. And this is also one of the reasons why we said, okay, we cannot get every of them. We have several thousands of developers. We cannot check everybody, surely. And also we want to give the colleagues the freedom to use what they want. And this was also one of the things where we said, okay, we have to check that we have tools or services which check what is used. And this was also one of the reasons for our 4-star rating, to provide the colleagues there some guidance and help. To say, oh, if they have added something, then they get a report with an X build as example, or we are currently also working on a GitHub integration, so that if somebody add a library, he immediately get, like, how it's named, the Sonar Cube, that you get a comment on a pull request as example, or an issue in your project, or you have just added a library with a bad rating. Please check if you really want to use this, so before it goes to production. But what I try to come to is also a bit regarding if somebody adds a library some years ago, and this library is never updated. You just also had this sample from Spring Boot, because also we had this sometimes people started with a Spring Boot project 1.5, and then there came Spring Boot 2, which was not completely backward compatible. And it take, I don't know, I know I was in a team, we had not a big application, but it take us, I guess, more than 1 week or around 1 week to do the migration from 1.5 to 2.0.
Okay. Well, what interests me, and what you had to do then? I cannot remember. Why is there a problem with Spring Boot?
This was really, I guess, just at least what I learned, between 1.5 and 2.0, there were some libraries changed, and also they changed or deprecated some methods, or removed some methods and added something new. And also there was, I guess, a bit behavioral change regarding.
But which method? I mean, why it spent 1 week? So I mean, what are they methods? Or give me an example. Do you know something? So just because in this project was even worse. They had to migrate to 1.5 first, and then from 1.5 to 2. So they couldn't migrate just to 2.0. This was exactly. So what is the problem actually?
When I hope I remember correctly, because it was, I guess, 3 years ago or so. But one part was related to a database connectivity and handling of, I guess it was transactions, where we had, after the update, a bit strange behavior, and we checked it. And the other was related to security, where they, I guess, replaced one of the libraries. And where we had to change some annotations. And this, for us, it's then always to check, okay, we just update, or it does not compile. We check what has to be changed from the compile side. So it didn't
compile, or did behave strangely?
It did not so some parts didn't compile because they have renamed or removed methods which we use. And then we had also our regression tests. So during this time, I was really happy that we had a lot of tests and integration and system tests. And then we changed it. Oh, it take a while, then it compiles. We changed everything. We deployed it for our integration tests. And then I guess it was already that some unit tests failed. And then we checked, why the unit tests are failing. Then we investigated and analyzed. And then it, I guess, nearly took 1 week till we finally solved everything and found each problem.
How many developers were involved in this week?
Sorry.
How many developers?
Oh, it was only one developer. I guess it was mainly one colleague which drive it. And then we had also the meetings where we presented to the team that also the others see what has changed and to know in case somebody else then work again on this application.
Was it a public API or was it an internal implementation?
No, it was, as far as I remember, public API. It was really something which you directly can use from the Spring Boot APIs.
Okay. So
or the Spring framework, it's always hard, not hard. I learned in the last year that we have really hard to differentiate a bit between Spring Boot and Spring Boot dependency management and the Spring framework, because some colleagues often get confused because they say, oh, there's Spring Boot 2 dot something, but there's also Spring Framework 5, how this fit together, and we have always to explain that it's a bit different so that one uses the other and so on. Yeah, but the point, what we from security... Yeah.
Wait a second, because I got an idea from with the dependencies. What I already thought is, so management or project owners or whoever has the money or is sponsor of the project, they think open source is free, which isn't.
Yeah.
And what I will do in your case with the force is just to add artificial costs, maintaining costs to every dependency. Because what I think is every dependency requires me at least once a sprint or whatever I call it, once a release to go over the dependency. And what I do, I try to upgrade all the dependencies.
Yeah,
if I touch the code and before my tests, I always upgrade all the dependencies. And I'm lazy, therefore I try to avoid dependencies. So this is my thinking.
Yeah.
But you could actually quantify that, what does this mean on average? Because if you wait too long, then the week happens. And so it means open source is not free. This is the cost of open source. So every external dependency has to be maintained up to date. And if you do it this way, it will reduce naturally the total amount of dependencies. Because I don't know whether you're working with external companies. Sometimes I'm working for clients who are contract with external companies, and they always introduce their homegrown set of dependencies. Regardless whether we are using them or not, we always get the entire Jakarta Commons, Jakarta Apache Commons and whatever Lombok and whatever it was fashionable these days, and they maintain it, right?
Yeah, but I like this idea. Perhaps I should propose it to my colleagues, because we have also SAP internal since I guess more than 1 year now, the open source program office, which try to have the overview in the whole company what we drive regarding open source and also the tooling around this, where we can add something like this. Because I like also your approach that you update the libraries whenever you touch the application or the project. Because what we also currently discussing a bit internally regarding guidelines, that at least once a year open source dependency has to be updated, because this is exactly the problem a bit with the Spring Boot sample which I had in the big just before. If you have a library which is old because I found an interesting blog post or some solution for my problem on Stack Overflow and a magazine or wherever, I copy paste it and I copy paste the library in version 1.74, but already during this time when I copy paste it, 1.9 is already out as example. And then I don't update it because I just used it, copied it. The time flies, and then suddenly there's a security problem in 1.11, which is fixed with 1.11.1. But between my version used, 1.7 something and 1.11, there may be really changes which may harm me. And as older my library is, or the library version, the more or the higher is the risk that I get problems updating it. And that's really where we encourage the colleagues update as often as possible, and not only when you have a problem. And this is what we're also currently discussing internally, how we can do this, or how we can not only give the guidance.
Why once a year? If you think about this, the library is an extension of your code, if you think about this.
Yeah.
So actually, there's no difference between your source code and the library. As if you add the library to your POM, this is your stuff. This is your decision. You take ownership of this external thing. So, and if let's say if you would see the source code of the external thing, you will probably have to fix it. No, just because you don't see the code, I will just always upgrade the library to mitigate the risk. And just to talk about JavaScript a little bit, you also mentioned Angular. Known thing is this is a blog post. Angular has 2 semantic major releases a year, which means they can introduce 2 breaking changes a year. With that alone, I'm able to kill Angular. None of the management people know that. If I mention this, impossible. Then I send them, the blog post from Angular. I say, okay, then we cannot use it. And the problem with let's say Angular, because we have it right now, it is also misunderstanding. Say, yeah, but what can happen if it's in production? Do you really think that there will be some security issues? I say, what could happen is that let's say some hacker really found security issue which is not relevant. But because of political stuff, we will have to upgrade Angular, right? Now, if you wait too long, your build won't run. The problem is not the code in browser. The problem is your developer machine. So try to make run 2 years old Angular project. You will spend, I don't know how long, but maybe even 1 week. Probably 2 days, right? Because on your machine, you have probably 30,000 JavaScript files, no exaggerating, I measured that. And they all have to play well together with the recent NPM version, of course, right? And what we also had on the even in the workshops, I delivered some courses with Angular. Then I just stopped because this is not responsible. but what happened was at the workshops is some attendee told me, "Could you show us the command line generator from Angular?" And I did it. And what it generated in that night, an update happened, and what the generator generated was not compatible with the Angular runtime, and I think there were 20 AirHacks attendees at the airport. 20 people, we searched for 2 hours the problem. And one guy from Finland found that because he already had a similar experience. But this is what I say, okay, this is, you have to know it. And you have to mention this, And so what it actually means for us, for Java developers, is I would add costs to the library. And I would try, to upgrade on every change or not change. What usually happens in my world, so I do some commits, then unit tests are running. And then we are pushing it somewhere. There is a CI. It runs and provides. And talking about microservices, Java, right, backend. Then the black box and system tests are running. If they are successful, we know the quality is rich, and then we can push it to integration environment. So before the push to integration environment, this is the last moment where you will have to upgrade all the libraries and rerun your projects again. So you see, the results, the old results with the new libraries, and then push it. This would be my requirement. Now, if you have a library for 1 year and there was no version change, this is suspicious. I would say,
exactly.
This is what I we have actually 2 indicators. One, we always upgrading the libraries, but when for 1 year there was no upgrade, it means the library is probably legacy stuff or no more maintained, or if it's still viable, maybe this is like bouncy castle or like it's done. This could be, but it should be a statement from the project. We are using this library and there were no more updates because. And if there's no because, I would delete the library.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, but also for us, it's sometimes in this way harder to bring in such standards and such guidance because then all of the developers should follow it. And you can imagine in a bigger at least in our company, a lot of discussions around this because we have not the freedom anymore for all developers. They have to take care about this, what's for their own projects. Really, a lot of just about the process, not the discussion, make it sense or not. It's more about, can we really do it or not? Even if it makes sense, it's sometimes a bit annoying, I would say. But still, but
really try. Imagine, all the developers' discussion. They are just funny, and only we can do this. Imagine we had such a discussion, in a butcher shop or carpenter or garage. When the butcher say, "Why I have use a knife to cut my sausages, a chainsaw, or would be far more fun, because then it's more power and I could playful. This is really boring with my old knife, to cut the sausages, or in the garage that they will just use some funky tools just to have more fun. I would say what happens over time, we have to add value to our clients, and our job is to write boring software. And what I do personally, I try to delete as much stuff as only possible in my commercial work. And in my hobby time, I have fun. So what I do on weekends and vacations, I create crazy stuff or mix of all the technologies just for fun. And what you can do in the solution would be in larger companies do the same. Actually, Google started with that, right? So you can say you can work 4 days a week with a reasonable stuff, and on Friday just experiment. Use just reactive programming for implementation of HTTP, which doesn't make any sense. But if you like, just do it, right? And this is what I will approach, because what the developers are saying, this is boring, right? And I give you actually also completely different stories, a funny one. I was in project, it was at least 12 years ago. So, we had a back office application which was written in Swing. And back then already Swing had a bad reputation because it looked boring and so and for me it was a good decision because I mean developers knew it and they very quickly developed the backup application and it was done. And and they were back then there was already agile, so we have stand-up meetings and all the stuff. And the developers were extremely unhappy and they wanted actually to migrate away from Swing. And they say why, and they never told me actually. And then one guy we had after work meeting, and he told me the problem is what we not even considered by the management because it just works. The others have issues, tasks. There is a huge action in the web, and we are done. No one we just not very thankful work what we are doing because there are no bugs, nothing. We just did it and we are done. And this is boring. And we just know there's nothing else to do. And it was okay, just because you are done doesn't mean we have to migrate to web, to introduce more bugs. And what happened then is, all the developers who were not that interested in having, sleepless nights, they took over the Swing and they were really happy with it and introduced new functionality. And the fresh guys, they just, built some crazy web stuff to have more fun and more management attention or whatever attention they wanted to have. Also interesting, right? Back then I said, okay, there's also was parallel to my, Java E Jakarta E because forget about Jakarta E. Recently, funny, JMS. They say, okay, why I'm still speaking about the legacy JMS? I said, what do you mean by that? Yeah, everyone else is doing Kafka. It's like, oh, really? But Kafka and JMS are two complete different things, right? It's like, yeah, still, but you don't get any project with JMS and Kafka is hot right now. And what it means is, I'm very sure Kafka is going to be completely misused to replace JMS. And then we get the next, task forces because Kafka is exactly not messaging-oriented middleware. It's not about queues. And this is what happens, constantly in projects. And so I would say what we should do is you should, print a T-shirt. Boring is good. This is the and whatever dependencies on freedom you like, forget about this. We work, from 8 to 5. After then we have our freedom in our leisure, so we can do whatever we like. We can experiment software or just go take a walk. And in work, we work, effectively without any experiments. And on Friday, we do crazy experiments. So I would say, crazy Fridays, no standards, just dependencies. So there will be a challenge, add as many dependencies as you can to your POM and create something trivial. This would be a nice challenge, right?
Perhaps I can propose this for our next hackathon in our team. Who builds the application with the most dependencies?
Yeah, this no kidding. This is actually fun. Why not? We say, okay, we restricted, for the real world, and we have hackathon or casual Friday, whatever you call this thing, and say then the challenge is, we have a hello world HTTP endpoint. And create the craziest possible reactive, highly scalable, cloud-native, machine learning, infrastructure around that. This is what I would do, right? And then go ahead. And then developers can just play whatever they like. They win the competition. And then in project, hopefully, they will delete all the dependencies.
Yeah. Just as I have mentioned Google also. Do you know a bit how Google, at least officially, handles the usage of open source? Because there's very often this that you read blog articles or something like this, that they have this not mono or single repo where the whole source code of the company is in. Because also when we discuss by us internally, how we can do it for us, or what would be the goal where we want to drive our the usage or providing of open source libraries for the internal developers. There were also some discussions, if we should just put everything in a single repo and then the people have to use it from the repo and not directly from more or less the internet or maybe central and so on. But I never completely get it how Google does it, because I only read one blog article where they mentioned whenever a developer wants to use open source, he has to check if it's already in the repo, and if not, he has to put it in the repo, and from this point on, he's responsible for this open source library and also to down or backport everything or upgrade the library and maintain it. And then it's a bit
and also upgrade
like
this, right? Because if if they introduce new functionality, he is then in charge of creating tools which upgrade the existing code. So he's actually responsible for the migration from one version to another.
Yeah, exactly. And there was a bit this then, but there wasn't completely clear because if somebody then uses this as dependency, they have also to build it and I guess provide it in some internal Nexus or a central Maven repository and so. But this reminds me a bit, this can be also regarding this borrowing stuff to say, oh, we have then a set of libraries or open source libraries, which this is the borrowing stuff, which we have proven that it's okay to use.
Mm-hmm.
And there's less likely that there's some completely fancy stuff is coming in or something which is just done by one maintainer or contributor because whoever brings it in is then responsible for it.
Yep.
So I would expect that whoever take the decision, I want to have this library in, take this decision far more careful.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be responsible for some crappy software at the end.
Funny because I think also a long time ago, I was hired by SAP to teach ABAP developers Java.
Oh.
And this was a really good experience. I was in Saint-Léon-Roth in the academy there. I spent several weeks, and we had conversations about reuse. And I said, okay, in Java we tried to reuse things back then, and the ABAP and the developers say we will never do it. It's like, why not? It's like, because back then, this was back then. They said if they do something reusable, they are in charge of this library forever.
Yeah.
And this is really hard because if this is reused, they often, they will have to not only maintain their projects, also the other projects. So you already had it back then in ABAP, but not in Java. So you were actually Google before Google. I think it was around 2000, I would imagine 2003 or something like this.
Okay.
This was the time where you migrated to Java internally at SAP, and they were really interesting conversation with ABAP developers. They were extremely pragmatic, and they were very happy with the ABAP environment, the IDEs. And I came, from the Java world, and I had to teach them because it was a management decision at SAP back then. Teach them Java, and not everyone was happy, but what they understood is I do my job. I just show them Java and I can speak, and they like my approach because I thought I explained them, my project experience and from my project, how they work, and then we get the conversation. And at the beginning, they were really angry. And then you say, okay, I'm also just a developer and they are developers. So we had lots of nice discussion during the lunch and lunch break and stuff like that. Right? But
reminds me a bit.
In my larger projects right now, we have similar, not as strict as in Google. We say for boring microservices, we are using microprofile Jakarta E. No discussion. If you would like to do something else, just tell us what's wrong with that. So this is not like, a requirement. This is a strong suggestion and a strong opinion, loosely held. So if you would show me that, I don't know, Spring Boot is smaller, faster, whatever, we will switch to Spring Boot. But it wasn't so far. So, and then you say, and if you have specific needs, then try to find something which is popular. Let's say, if we really would like to have event-driven applications, I would pick right now Kafka before I pick something crazier than Kafka, right? Because it's more popular. Many companies are using this, and the chances are the lowest that Kafka will tomorrow disappear.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about. So for boring stuff or, operating system, the same. I would say no one, if I would run something on the server, I would say Linux is a reasonable decision, right? And no one is excited about Linux anymore. As you remember, 15 years ago, the Linux certification, everyone, they were like, I never understood this because I do Linux all the time. And at one point of time was very fashionable. And now it's just commodity. It just runs somewhere, right? So, and this is the same. So Java E and microprofile is for me like Linux. We just take it, we run the workload on it, and everyone is happy. It is proven. We know how to monitor that. And actually, it's already, there were enough experiments, in the last 20 years that we know that it's working. So, and if we need something more specific because we have specific requirements, then we will take a look on something popular, standard, and I take a look, for instance, first Cloud Native Foundation. Or what is there? Is there mapping to Java, right? For instance, recently was the decision Open Tracing, what to take. So Jaeger tracing, is an Cloud Native Foundation server. Let's pick that. Why I should, this is done. So I don't have, the experiment. This is like, back then in Java, we looked at JCP, and it worked well in the last 20 years.
Yeah, that's also why I like this, if it makes sense, surely, the approach with microservices. Because then you can also say, okay, this is our core service. perhaps also a bigger microservice, or it depends a bit on the project and application. But then I say, we have their specific use cases. Exactly for this use case, it would be better to implement it perhaps in Go because it's, I don't know, far more performant or whatever. And then say, okay, for this encapsulated microservice, I do a bit fancy stuff.
Yeah.
And then I can really say, this is then just the small part where it's required. And not that I say, all services or the whole application now has to use fancy stuff because for this 10% of the application where it is required.
Yeah.
And this is why I like them to have such approaches to say, okay, just split it as it's required.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes you already have a feeling that what you're doing is not exactly right. So as you probably know, my opinion about OSGI. So I talk publicly about that. And I got lots of heat of that. So I got, on Twitter, how you are a monolithic guys, whatever. And it just disappeared because the benefits were really hard, to explain. So I say, why are you doing OSGI? Because it's modular. Okay, I mean, this is like, why you bought a race car? Yeah, because I have to drive. It's like, okay, but why race car? You could just pick, whatever car. So this is the same discussion. And and the OSGI, no one talks about that, right? AOP, exactly. There was AOP alliance. Everything has to be extracted into aspects for reusability. And now it was always extracted in Jakarta in microprofile. So we had transaction as aspects. So everything was already there. But back then was okay. But the servers are too big, so we do it by ourselves. And it disappeared. No one talks about AOP anymore, right? Or this is what I wanted to say. So always, try to think about that. What is the added value? What you hear right now? So what problem does it solve? And if there is no problem to solve, or it's just funky stuff, it will probably disappear.
Yeah, exactly. It's sometimes where also we internally have to remind colleagues that we should first have a problem which we want to solve, and not start with the solution. And now we have to search a problem for our solution. Yeah, because we just wanted to drive something crazy.
So the last thing I would mention, also funny, because I almost so Halloween funny stories here. Startup started, and they asked me for advice, and there are several teams, and one team really wanted to have Scala, and I say, yeah, good. I mean, do it. I'm not the owner. If the owner says yes, and you would like to have the Scala, do Scala. I cannot help you, but you can have Scala, right? So 2 years later, this was nice. The project lead comes to me, and he asked me, do you remember why we have Scala? Like, Scala? No. And then I searched for the emails, and I found the emails. Like, I remember, because the guys wanted to have Scala. So it turns out the guys are no more there. And all the other guys, they don't like Scala, and they don't understand what's going on there. It's like, should they migrate away from Scala? It's like, if it works, no. But I mean, if you don't like it, what I can tell you, migration is always painful. Why, right? Yeah. And they don't have Scala anymore, for instance. And there was no reason to have Scala, except back then Scala was fashionable. And languages, is my personal opinion, is I use Java programming language on JVM. Try to avoid everything else. And because if I really have a specific problem, then the solution is probably not Kotlin, rather than Rust or Go. And in the Kubernetes environment, probably even Rust, because even smaller. And if you would like to have, build CLI applications, probably Go, right? So this was always, if I, back then even, right, there was I don't know if they remember the Ruby on Rails discussion.
Yeah.
So I never got it, if you are a Java developer and you really like to learn something else, forget about JRuby, go to the real Ruby with Rails. So you learn complete different stack. So no, like, so half-ass, JVM language. So this is what I never got. So why I should do this? If I would learn something new, then I would like to learn something completely new, and not, run something on the JVM and complete different is GraalVM, because on GraalVM gives you the opportunity to run the real thing. This is the crazy stuff, the real Node.js on JVM, and you can communicate with it. So this is actually really interesting, but it's a completely different story.
Yeah, there's also something which I have to have a look into. The GraalVM is on my, I would say, pile of shame, where I say, when I have the next week time and next weekend time, I have a look into this topic.
What I did, actually, maybe it's helpful, in the micro profile, how it's called, workshop, I recorded recently. I use GraalVM, which loaded JavaScript for HTML rendering.
Okay.
But this is a very simple example, because it's like replacement of NAS1. So you can take a look on this, and this works already. And it's called micro profile training, I think. And the repository is on GitHub. So it's completely free. Yeah, micro-profile training. And I use Graal dependency as the multilingual dependency, right? So this is Graal without cross-compilation. So I use Graal capabilities for polyglot. And I loaded mustache, I think, or handlebars to render HTML.
So I hope I remember correctly. For Quarkus, there's also the way to build it with GraalVM.
Graal, yeah.
So that so that's a binary, a native image then at the end, I
It's
guess.
binary, exactly.
Binary. Okay, and what I like, or what was interesting for me, a bit also from security perspective, because we had also in the past the discussion, when you build your application with a lot of dependencies, but for one dependency, you only use 10% of the code of the dependency. So that you just use this 10% of code and the rest is deleted. So that's not on the runtime. And so I thought, Quarkus, I guess, does exactly this with this native.
Extensions do it.
Everything.
What they do, the extensions, for instance, if you use, I think, FlyWayDB, and Quarkus recognizes that it only uses, let's say, Postgres, so they will deactivate or delete all others. So the extensions are doing this if they are written well.
Yeah.
But if you just add dependency to Quarkus, nothing will happen, right?
Oh, okay.
And if you're Quarkus, you don't have to run on Graal. Actually, none of my projects in production, we use Quarkus on Graal. We use Quarkus on stock JVMs, OpenJ9, Azul, OpenJDK, Oracle. And if you would like to cross-compile it to GraalVM, Maven clean install -p native, and you get it.
Okay. I have to have a look into this because, as mentioned, from the security perspective, with the security colleagues, I'm not a security expert here, but we had sometimes the discussion how we could harden our applications. And one idea was that...
What's really great in Quarkus is there is no class loading at runtime.
Okay, yeah. This exactly
no reflection. So from security, I never thought about that. But actually, from security perspective, it's really interesting because basically in Quarkus, there's no dynamic behavior. This is why it starts so fast. So it generates code for dependency injection. Oh, another thing. It might be interesting. You know dependency injection at inject, right?
Yeah, sure.
With Quarkus, you get the errors on build time because on build time, it already knows how everything connects and it will generate bytecode to have the injection working. On regular servers, you will get it on runtime because reflection happens on runtime and Quarkus deploys, if you will, at build time.
And exactly when I mentioned this sample with Jackson, I guess it was 2.9 libraries, because they had exactly these problems that they reloaded classes on runtime, and this could then be used to have an attack. And exactly when you use it then with something like Quark, or if it's possible, because you can then say, okay, exactly this part is not used by my application, and when I don't build it in my binary, the security vulnerability can never be attacked or used.
Exactly.
So you are safe, even if you have a library which this has this problem, but I don't use it, and I can be safe because I don't compile it and it's not in my binary. Because we have often, or not often, but sometimes then the problem, if there is some vulnerability in a library, which is hard to exploit, and there are mitigation strategies that we say, okay, when you don't use this and that, then you are safe. Then you can also use the vulnerable library, but how to make sure that a developer really take care that he doesn't enable A or B. And when we can do it during compile time to say, okay, A and B is not enabled. So we remove the whole code for A and B, and then we can be safe that whatever we build and run cannot be attacked.
This is actually what the Quarkus extensions are doing. There's a build time and runtime extension, and actually you could integrate your tool as an extension to Quarkus because at the build time you will get the true dependencies from all other extensions, and you can see what happens. So it will be interesting actually project. So thank you for your time and coming back.
Thanks. Awesome.
And where people can find you on the internet. So
at best would be on Twitter. It's still at @1mebo, as a 1SONE Mebo, or on GitHub. It's just Mebo.
Okay, and of course the SAP. As it's called, I forgot. Rating project, not rating, a specific name.
Yeah, sure. So the 4-stars rating core.
4-stars rating core, exactly. This is on GitHub, one of the sponsored. It's actually, this is the official SAP repo, 4-stars rating core.
Yeah, it's officially open source project by SAP, yes.
Thank you, and see you next year, right?
Yeah,
so come back, so implement whatever I said, and now then I will use your tool to delete my dependencies, right?
Okay. Okay, good, then.
Thank you.
Bye.